Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, once again on this Monday evening. I'm Karina from the Matura Express, and what I'm going to talk about today is a quite challenging topic, or so I think. It's all about cross-cultural communication, especially related to business and how having knowledge or not having knowledge about other nations, about other cultures, about your business partners, how that can affect the way of doing business. And I'll try and give you a bit of background information on what to be careful about. So what I'll tell you very briefly, so cross-cultural communication is the headline, and I'll also try and define it for you, whereas especially the second point, the high and low context cultures, tells you a lot about what it is really. Cross-cultural communication, or the cross-cultural part, is a quite wide-ranging topic really. Involves a good many different aspects. I'll try and focus on the most important ones, as I said, the ones that are related to business, because yeah, that's what I think could be important for you, and it's also easier to kind of narrow it down and to kind of try and find focus. I'll also try and answer the questions why it is important to have cross-cultural knowledge, or at least to be aware of the fact that it exists, because otherwise there's a lot of possible misunderstandings that could arise while you are doing business with people from, I don't know, America, Japan, Spain, whatever. There's a lot, some quite important aspects to consider. As always, I will first try and give you some words that are important, that are not in the book. I had a look in the books that you guys probably have, and I thought there might be some additional vocabulary or some hints as to what certain words could mean. We have the word communicate, which is quite easy as such, because we use the same word in German really. But what I noticed that in exam situations, sometimes the endings of the respective forms, either the noun or the verb, sort of go wrong, and then you kind of get botched versions and the mix of the two. So to communicate is the verb and communication is the noun. In exam situations, in stress situations, in high pressure situations, this sometimes results a little bit difficult, and you get kind of, as I said, a botched mix of the two things. Misunderstandings should be a quite easy one, a word that even if you may not actually actively know it, you could still passively guess, at least from context, if it was in one of your texts. Maybe slightly more difficult with the next two words, but prejudice and stereotypes do definitely play a very important role in cross-cultural communications. Prejudice are Vorurteile in German, usually directed, the moment when you spell English nouns with capital letters. Prejudice are usually directed to or towards one person. So, I don't know, you're sitting in a business meeting and you see a person walking through the door, and at first glance you kind of have a certain picture about that person based on, I don't know, the way he or she dresses, or the way he or she walks or talks or whatever. So prejudice are usually geared towards one person. We have prejudice about a certain person, but we have stereotypes, which is the same word in German really. Stereotypen. I don't think that there is a German word really, which is usually more geared towards nations or towards a whole country. Usually in class, people kind of ask, so what do you think, or what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear United States of America? And then you'd come up with, a good many stereotypes that we have about the country. whether or not they are true, or whether or not they are portrayed in the media in like a wrong way, or if social media kind of portray them in a wrong way, that's, you know, that would be probably, or could be the content of a different stream, really. It's not my task tonight to discuss prejudice and stereotypes. Usually they have kind of a true core. They come from somewhere. There was like a reason why they came into being, but then you have to be very careful with them, really. Xenophobia is the, you know, more sophisticated, more intelligent word, if you want, for racism. So xenophobia is dislike of people of a different nation with different religious backgrounds or different skin color. Misconceptions might be a word that you're not familiar with. One of those words that sounds super intelligent if you use it in your exams. A misconception is, well, I don't really know if we have a German word, but you're actually confronted with a problem or with a new person, and based on your prejudice or your stereotypes, you maybe do form an opinion about the person, you do think something about the person that turns out to be wrong. So a misconception is an assumption that turns out to be wrong at the end. To judge someone is jemanden or verurteilen, if you want. The noun also sometimes does cause problems in exam situations. It's one of the nouns that ends in the suffix ment. So to judge someone, jemand verurteilen, judgment, der Urteil at the end of the day. Business relationships is clear. What I wanted to demonstrate here is that you can definitely use the word relationship for, you know, a business connection as well. So definitely does work. Some people are reluctant about using it because it sounds like a very personal thing, even though it's not. Proximity is one of the words that I'll talk about. Distance, or it's rather about closeness, really. One aspect of cross-cultural communication is how close you can come to a person, especially when greeting this person. There are some cultures who are more open. They would, you know, touch you, hug you, give you a pat on the shoulder. There's other cultures that only shake hands, sometimes not even that. So that's what proximity is all about, like how close can you come to a person, how much of distance you have to keep in business relationships. Avoidance behavior is a concept that you may have not heard about. Seems to be an issue in business, nevertheless. There are some people, the stereotypes, or who have stereotypes and prejudice to such an extent that they kind of try to avoid means vermeiden, no contact with foreigners for as much as possible. There have been studies done about that, especially again in a business context. So obviously in a business context there are people who are kind of, well, no, I don't feel safe in the area of cross-cultural communications. I sort of avoid that. And cultural identity is a concept as well. Cultural identity is kind of what makes a country. So that's mainly about how you, take you guys as an example, how do you present, you as an Austrian, how do you present the country? What do you stand for? What do you talk about? Like, what is typically Austrian for you? What message would you convey to your foreign business partners? Like, how would you present the country? Or how would you present yourself? And then by that, represent the country. So that's it, really. For a change, everything fits on one page. Saves me the bother. I'll give you a quick look, or I'll let you have a quick look on the words again. As I said, make sure that you, in your preparation time, that you get the right type of word, that you get the right Wortart, like in communicate and communication, or the judge and the judgment. Some of the, especially the concepts of the avoidance behavior and the cultural identity, xenophobia, race, or stereotypes and prejudice, you may want to include them in your exams as well. Usually gives you something to talk about. maybe also the question, like, what stereotypes are there about the Austrians? Like, going, cultural identity and stereotypes in this case would go together. Like, what do other people think about us, and how do we present it? Do we confirm the stereotypes? Yes or no? Okay, I think that's it. I will very quickly give you some information about what high and low context cultures are, because they are basically the key concept in cross-cultural communication. It may sound a bit confusing if you haven't had a lot of contact, especially in like business relationships with people from other country. High context basically means that you have very few personal relationships with the person that you are dealing with. Your negotiations, let's say we're in a business meeting, let's take this as the situation. In high context cultures, it would all be about business. It would be about the negotiation. You and your business partners, you want to, come to a conclusion. You want to reach an agreement. You want to negotiate a treaty. You want to, sign a contract, whatever. There is an outcome, and there's not much to go with it, really. There's in high context cultures, so we're talking about countries here. So the definition of high and low context cultures are countries. I'll tell you where, I will tell you who is who and where Austria figures in a minute. So in high context cultures, it is all about the aim. It is about what you want to achieve, really. And there's very little personal relationships going on. Whereas in low context cultures, interpersonal communications and interpersonal relationships, friendships, even if you want to call them that, are very important. Low context cultures very much rely on talking. So they talk a lot about the aim they want to achieve, but there's also a lot going on in the background, and you would usually also meet in less formal locations, talk a lot about the food, about the weather, whatever. So the context is less important, or at least it is less obviously important, whereas in high context cultures you're going to the core of the matter pretty quickly. So that's basically what high and low context is all about. So there's low context cultures. That's where Austria and Germany would figure. The US, the UK, Denmark and Norway, such countries as well. So we are usually pretty much, pretty straightforward. There's also, can I actually change to, I can, yay. That was actually my attempt to no, I can't because I can't write. Okay, that makes it very difficult. So we have low, I'll try it that way. Facilitates the reading for you guys, I suppose. So we have the US, the UK, Germany, that moment when. Austria would figure here as well. So usually, competitive. The word competition, Wettbewerb, competitive. Low context cultures are usually quite competitive, so there's a lot of competition going on in between the people who are trying to negotiate, who are negotiating the treaties. I don't know if you've ever seen television shows about meetings that take place in America, obviously fictional, but there's a lot of discussing going on, there's a lot of debate going on. Usually people try to out-talk the other person. They're talking basically on top of their voices to achieve what they want. So we can definitely call the low context cultures task-oriented. It's mainly about what you want to achieve, and if the whole thing is about negotiating a treaty this afternoon or that night, you really want an outcome. Usually they are also highly individualistic. Meaning that people are looking after their own benefit, so you're trying to reach an agreement that is good for you and your team and your company. It's usually not one person negotiating for him or herself, but it's a very individualistic thing, so you're not really trying to be helpful or forthcoming to the others. It's usually about yourself. It's your benefits. It's what you want. It is definitely a written and thereby quite formal way of doing business. That means that if you do not have a written contract at the end that says, well, that's the terms, that's the sum of money that it's all about or whatever, then it is like the negotiation has not been done properly. So everything has to be written down. There's contracts, there's lawyers who sort of, give a legal touch to the whole thing. And what is important as well, or what is interesting as well, usually low context cultures are very much present or focused on the present or the future, so they want benefits for the future. Whereas high context cultures usually kind of value the past very much as well, would go back to past experiences, also talk about them and kind of compare and contrast the past and the present, like what did work in the past might work in the future as well. Whereas low context cultures kind of take the state of the art and talk about the present and try to find a good deal for the present and for the future, of course. Whereas, as I said, there's high context cultures would, for the way they are, also try and include past experiences. Quickly, the high context ones. High context, maybe harder to understand because that's not the realms that we are really dealing with, would be Japan and China, like countries, then as well countries like Saudi Arabia, as they are becoming increasingly important in business. They would also have a different approach to the whole thing. And also the Southern European countries, so usually doing business with Italians or the Spaniards is kind of different as well. That would be low context cultures, that would be high context cultures, sorry. Keep mixing up the terms. Instead of being competitive, they are more cooperative. So you would not have one individual or two individuals being the negotiators, being the ringleaders kind of thing. You would have a team rather than individual persons. A team with different tasks, of course, but then still it would be a team and it would be a good many people talking usually. The level of noise is also kind of bit higher. They would also usually try to establish relations or relationships with their business partners, probably because they want to have a long-term business relationship and want to make sure that, keep the contact alive right from the start. But then you would also, as I said, business meetings in, Spain, that's the country where I know how business meetings work. They would maybe not even take place in the company as such, but they would take place in a restaurant or in a sort of nicer surroundings because relationships are important. You would try and make your business partners feel relaxed and kind of give the whole thing an informal atmosphere. It's more of a team effort, as I said. It's more cooperative, more of a team thing. They would have specialists for different areas, but they would also bring them. So there's not one person doing everything. They would also bring all the experts on the different parts that they have. Oral agreements do count. So the handshake thing still works more or works better in a high context society than it does in the low context one. So the word, I give you my word on, and that's going to be that, kind of works more than it does in low context cultures. So written contracts are a must in Austria, in America. Less so in Italy and Spain. There's still, I promise to do this, and that's kind of still a concept that is kind of valid. One thing that is very interesting, or so I think, is that in high context cultures, and that's sometimes difficult for us, I guess, at the end of the day, the whole concept of space and proximity and closeness, like the one that or the stuff that I talked about in the beginning, is a little different. People from Spain and from Italy as well, and from Saudi Arabia, from what I can tell from experience, they are very, they're coming quite close. They would give you a hug even if they're not like friends, or even if if you don't really know each other. So everything is like much closer. That is something that especially people from America sometimes struggle with, because there you would always keep your distance, and it is a business meeting, so therefore it is formal, and you have to keep the personal space that you have to maintain. Yeah, I think that was the most important point for you to know, really. I will very quickly tell you a few things about why there are so many cultural misunderstandings. We sometimes, so if I say we, I in this case probably talk about Austrians, because that's we usually, or people in general, usually think that there are more similarities between the cultures than there actually are. So we assume that the way we act is a universally accepted concept, but then at the end of the day it isn't. So you should probably, you're well off with the advice to look into cultural norms of different countries. If you go abroad, it doesn't even have to be a business negotiation, can also be a trip to somewhere, but we usually assume that the way we do stuff is the correct one and that everything else is weird. But then other people think the same thing, and that's why cultural misunderstandings come up, I guess, at the end of the day. Language, of course, does play a role as well. If we can't really communicate our point of view to other people, or if other people can't communicate their point of view to us, then cultural misunderstandings can arise, even though they are not meant in a bad way, which is the language misunderstanding. There was no real lingua franca to be found, and you had to use gestures to explain what you want and to explain what you think. Can go wrong and can kind of leave the impression that there was a thorough and big misunderstanding there, even if it was only a language barrier. Well, misinterpretations of behavior. So people do stuff that you behave. I can't spell the word. It's so sad. Behavior. So people do something that you find strange from your, Central European perspective. Then you, again, interpret the behavior as something bad, whereas you're, the person you're talking to might do the same thing. A typically Austrian custom, whatever, that doesn't go down well in another country. And or with people from a different background. So behavior is misinterpreted in such a way that it then leads to negative interaction. Something that I already just talked about are the stereotypes. I guess it's quite hard to do away with them. I think we all live with a certain set of stereotypes that is in our brains, and then to overcome stereotypes is very hard, or so people say. We kind of judge people by what we know about them, or what we think we know about them. So that leads to a good many cultural differences as well, especially when it comes to the whole closeness and proximity thing. I guess that's an aspect. Another thing that leads to cultural misunderstandings is evaluation. Kind of ties up with the first point, really. People tend to evaluate the behavior of others and kind of categorize it and say, well, that was bad, that was wrong, that was correct, whatever. Regardless of the traditions of a country, regardless of the customs, we just kind of say, well, that was not the way we do it, and therefore it's wrong. So it kind of ties up with the first point. So we should maybe not evaluate the behavior of people, but kind of respect the fact that they're that they have a different culture, whatever. Anxiety or fear sometimes obviously plays a role as well. So there are people who are kind of anxious in dealing with other people. That's where the avoidance behavior kind of ties in. So people would approach people from a different country with a different language in a shy way, in a timid way, in a way that is not like open, and therefore like create new misunderstandings, create new problems. So yeah, I guess that's where that's all the factors that can lead to misunderstandings. I start to like the keyboard. That can to lead misunderstandings when you have to do business with people from other nations. So you might be quite well, or it might be a quite good piece of advice to like look into cultural behaviors and into cultural norms beforehand. Doesn't have to be for business, like not all of you will go out straight into business and, well, not straight to like America and negotiate a very important treaty or a very important contract there. But it definitely also holds true for traveling, because we should approach different cultures and different customs with respect, but therefore we have to know something about them. So I guess cross-cultural exchange is a very interesting point, and I hope I could give you some ideas on like what you can investigate into for your exam, but also for your private, interaction with people. I'll hopefully see you next week with yet another topic. We do stick with the topic really. It will be about communication again. I'll show you how to deal with dictionaries, which sounds trivial, but is obviously more complex or more complicated than we may want to think. Thank you very much and good night.